Okay. So good evening everybody and welcome to today's Officers Association webinar. The title of this webinar is Mind Flip, Identifying Your Transferable Skills and Helping You Get the Job You Want. This is the second of two webinars that our guest speaker is doing with us. The first one, Identifying Transferable Skills, was broadcast on the 18th of July and is available on YouTube if you'd like to refer back to it. So before we start the webinar, on your screen is a panel as shown here. If you want to if you click on the top left-hand button, it'll hide the panel. Click on it again, it'll open it out. Now lower down, there is a small section which is highlighted with a large red arrow, where you can enter questions for our guest speaker. So enter your question, make them short and concise, please. You can enter a question for the guest speaker and then click on send. So please, if you've got any burning questions or any frustrations in your job search, do send them in now and we can address them with our speaker. So today's webinar is more in the form of a question and answer session with our guest Zena Everett, who's an organisational psychologist and cognitive behavioural coach. And we intend this to focus on helping you to find and sell a unique mix of your skills, knowledge, experience and networks. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Zena. Zena, welcome to the webinar tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us a tiny bit of your background just before we start the webinar?
Of course, yes. I used to have a business that recruited recruiters. I don't know if anybody was on this on the first webinar that we did. It'd be good to know if you were. But so I had a business that recruited recruiters, if you can imagine that, and I sold it and retrained as an organisational psychologist and executive coach. So I now work with people to help them get great jobs, and then when they've got great jobs, to help them really exceed their performance in there. And I've written my book, Mind Flip, which is a job really for people changing careers or changing jobs, as well as seeking internal promotion. And I've got, so with my recruitment background and also as a coach, I've got a wealth of experience in helping people change careers and maybe identifying some areas where people's job search have stalled that would be quite useful insights, which I hope we'll share today.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much, Zena. So, Zena, can I kick off today by saying that we get quite a number of military service leavers who come to us who have approached the market by responding to advertisements, but are simply getting no response at all and no interviews and no job offers. So what's going wrong there then?
Well, I think this is one of the most common frustrations and feedback that we get, isn't it? That people they're doing everything right. They're throwing the kitchen sink at the job market and not getting anything back. And so the biggest advice that people like me say is just step back away from your computer, step away from those job alerts, stop applying for advertisements. So two bits of information here. First of all, if that was a client of mine, I would make them, as I say, rethink how they're doing things, stop responding to job alerts and go out directly, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, and use their network. But I would also just get them to really look at how specific they're being to the job ads. So sometimes, and we're going to talk about networking, as I say, I'm giving you a whole stream of consciousness here, but hopefully this makes sense. So we're going to talk about how the job market has gone underground and people need to find their network. About 75% of jobs are found through the network. You've all heard this a squillion times, not just from me. But I know, because people are just going to type in and say, look, sometimes you just need to apply for roles. So I would say if somebody's responded to hundreds of advertisements and they're not getting anywhere, they're probably not tailoring their CV really specifically to the job that they're applying for. They're not really drilling down into that job description, thinking what are the most specific things in the key results area right at the top of the job description or the job advertisement that this client is looking for, and does this company or recruiter is looking for, and does my CV scream out that I have already been successful in a similar role, so I can hit the ground running? Because if it doesn't, but you think, look, I could do that job because I've got the softer skills and I'm addressing so much on page 2 of the job description, and I could do it, and I think I'd be brilliant at it, but it doesn't say explicitly to the boss, to the person filtering out at every stage of the filtering process that you can do it, then you're just simply not going to get through. So it's often people have to tailor way more. You have to write your CV addressing the job description and work backwards, as opposed to telling them everything you've done in your life. So shall I keep going about CVs, Clive, or stop me? And let's
I think it's wonderful. Do keep going. And particularly whether people should apply for advertisements, and as you are doing. No, this is excellent. Thank you.
One of the biggest frustrations, I think, is people responding to a job alert. So they've registered their CV on job boards, which they need to do, I guess, although judiciously, and they're getting an alert saying, oh, look, we've matched you to this particular job. That doesn't mean that a person has said, look, this person is right for this job. It just means that some algorithms have kind of loosely said this would be right for you, to kind of keep you engaged with their job, on their job board and so on. So I think the danger is that people just are busy but not smart. So they're confusing active job search with spending a lot of time applying for jobs. But this way of responding to hundreds of advertisements is an old-fashioned way that simply does not get results. So if there's only one thing that people take away from that, there's got to be a different way. And that way is, as you were told countless times, you have to really drill down into your skill set, think, what is it about me that makes me hireable? What have I got to offer? What do I want to do? What are my values? Do all that work and that thinking, and then think, okay, who needs that? So instead of looking for a job, you've got to get out there and find an opportunity that you can fill. And the only way you do that is by just talking to people. The phone is your best tool. So people rely on a CV as their sort of marketing document. But actually, if you can get in front of people, mates, network, mentors, previous colleagues, parents at the school gates, anybody at work, go and find out what's going on, and then find out what their work problems are, and then say, actually, you know, this is what I'm looking for. I've got these skills, this is what I've done, this is what I've achieved, this is what I want to do next. All that personal branding thing that we talk about, building up a career narrative, using metaphors, building a memorable picture, that we talked about that on the webinar. So I think our last webinar is downloadable, isn't it? And we talked a lot about building narratives and metaphors and talking about what you've done in a sort of a memorable style that builds a picture in people's minds, so they really understand the contribution you can make in your next role. So they've got to do all those things, not respond to hundreds of ads. You might hit it, but it's a very unscientific, unspecific way of job search.
Would you recommend people approach the market through recruiters, Zena?
Well, you know, at the last count, I think the recruitment industry turned over 28 billion. So, and that's including all the temporary workers' salaries. But nevertheless, there is a real role for recruiters, and you know, their goal is to get you a job. That's how they earn a living. So yes, I would say that, particularly if people have got a very specific skill set, so maybe very specific technical skills, for example, because recruiters exist. Nowadays they're quite polarized. You've got senior headhunters, then you've got the kind of, you know, the adecos, the generalists, and then in the middle, the vast part of the recruitment industry is very specialist agencies who are there to find a narrow set of but very specific skills. So I think it's all about marketing yourself. A headhunter will find you if you've got the right skills, because this is what they do, and that's where LinkedIn is powerful. But most people, I've said it again, you know, the figure that we all use is that the recruitment market has gone underground. 75% of people's jobs are found directly. Now, I think that if people are leaving the forces and can get some kind of contract or interim role, temporary role, that's fantastic, and recruiters are particularly good for that, some way in. But in a way, it doesn't matter how you do it, it's just a question of making sure that you get in and you build connections.
You mentioned in your earlier, the previous webinar, about a unique mix, that you have to find and sell, a unique mix of skills, knowledge, experience and networks. But can somebody actively look for a job by, in effect, touting their contacts?
When you say touting,
well, using their little black book of contacts to say, look, I have these contacts, you need to employ me because I can bring these people to you.
Oh gosh, yes, actually. I mean, I think that's a very good point, because people ignore the value of their own networks, and but that's a hugely powerful part of any organisation, is employing people who've got access to other good employees that they could bring in, or excellent suppliers, or understand the client base that they want to sell to or work with or do business with. So I think that's quite important. So networking is very important, and people ignore what's right under their nose, both for having access to finding out about opportunities in organisations and creating opportunities for themselves, but also the value of their potential network and who they bring access to the next employer. And, you know, later on, people can potentially bring clients or customers or a team with them, for example. So that's very important. That's why sometimes when we have people who are relocating, can be a little bit tricky for them. Not always, and you know, this kind of discussion tends to be quite polarized and black and white. So I'm not, you know, there's shades of grey and everything. But sometimes it can be difficult. I found when people are relocating because they may not have a UK network again, and sometimes that can be prohibitive.
There's quite an interesting question that's just come in from one of our listeners, so thank you for this. And it sort of is relevant to what we've just been talking about, Zena. He says, I'm finding jobs I'm good at via agencies, however, none are close to home. So how should I best approach local recruitment? This is a geographic issue, I think.
Ooh, right. Can you, if you could tell us where home is, that would be really interesting as well. I would say, well, first of all, that's really good news, actually, because it means that recruiters have identified that you've got a marketable skill set. So I think that's really good. And so what would be good is to look at, first of all, really just do a kind of double check on this and think, what am I in demand for? Because that tells you how to position yourself, and you can even build up your kind of brand even more around that. So that's a great piece of information. Now, with regard to locally, I would go through LinkedIn Jobs, which I think is a great source of information, to see where there are good recruiters in your area that work within your skill set, that specialise in your particular function. And indeed, that job board aggregator like Compare the Market or something, Indeed and LinkedIn Jobs are two that are good for relationship building. So they can tell you, I mean, also a good old Google search for whatever it is, Northamptonshire or something, that's always a bit of a clue.
It's in York.
It's in York, okay. Well, gosh, there's loads of recruiters up there, actually, and very good professional ones. So do some Googling and find them. But the other thing I would do is I would look at employers. Oh, how lovely to be working in New York anyway. But I would also be looking for major employers there, and approach them directly. Why not? What have you got to lose? So you've got to do things in several different ways to make it happen. So look to see if they've got resourcing pages on their websites and see if you can load up your CV directly as well. You could even, and I know it's easier said than done, but if you could find the person who you would actually work for, so the head of the function that you would report into in that organization, LinkedIn can be a good source of this. See if you can get in contact with them somehow and say, look, this is what I do. I'd really welcome an opportunity to talk to you. Perhaps I could contribute in these areas. Do your research, find out what's going on in the business. All these are ways to do it. I mean, just don't sit back and hope that some hand will find you, because it doesn't work like that. And if I can just keep going with this, if you think about it, it's kind of flattering for somebody who's in a senior role to have somebody say, look, I've read about in in the industry press about what you're doing with this. I think I could contribute here and here. This is my background. And there's so much positive feeling about supporting officers into civilian life. You know, somebody would have to be particularly churlish to think, do you know, I'm not going to have a coffee with this person. So I would really look at employers that you like the feel of in that area and get in front of them. And like I say, LinkedIn is a great way of identifying people. So, and if I can just keep going with this and talking about LinkedIn, Clive, if you don't mind, I think that LinkedIn is a really powerful tool, but some people make the mistake of just connecting with somebody and then thinking, right, well, they've not said, are you available for work? And, you know, so they're not interested. And I think the sooner people get an email address and take the conversation off LinkedIn, make it personal, and ideally then, you know, try and get in front of them, the better. So again, it's all about being proactive, and it takes people several goes to make things happen. So you've got to sell yourself a little bit.
One of the things we suggest to visitors to the OA is if they know somebody within an organisation, then they approach the person whose department or division they might be interested in through an existing contact, because that's a very good way of getting an introduction into an organisation.
Absolutely. So people don't think you're nuts. But, you know, worst case, you load your CV up on their hiring portal, so you get in their system. But remember, CVs get lost, recruiters, you know, internal recruiters as well leave, and all sorts of things. So, you know, just because you try once, you don't hear, doesn't mean it's a dead duck.
So go back to one of your earlier comments saying that the the recruitment market had gone underground. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, Zena? Okay, well, I think, and that expression comes from John Leeds, who's a great career coach and has written some really good books on this, by the way. So, so credit where credit is due, but I think it's a great metaphor. And the figure that, as I keep saying, people like me use the figure that 75% of jobs come through the network. So, I mean, obviously there's specialist differences and, you know, sector differences and so on. And, but generally speaking, for people who've already run in their career, not raw grads, jobs come from your network. And we find jobs often go to what's called the internal candidate. So that's brutally, that's the devil they know. So the idea that we want clients to do is to position themselves so that they are the internal candidate. So ideally, you're recommended by somebody already in the organisation, like you just said, Clive, so who says, look, you ought to talk to my mate, he's a good guy, but what he's really good at is, so they're not saying that, can you help him? You know, we need to do him a favour and get him, you know, get him a job. That's not a compelling hiring strategy at all. They need to say, you need to see my mate because she's done this, this, and this is what she's looking for. So it sounds like you've got a real sense of agency and purpose. So that's the first way. And bear in mind that, you know, plenty of corporates pay bounties to those people who recommend you. So they're not doing you a favour. You know, they're going to make, you're going to make them look good. And secondly, they might make a, you know, a nice cash sum out of it. So that's one thing to think about. And then, of course, ideally, you're already in there working in some kind of consulting, temporary contract position like I talked about. So when a permanent job comes in, then, you know, you're in a great place to put your hat in the ring. And they know that you fit in culturally. So this happens, you know, it can be quite frustrating.
But I think that hiring processes are so slow now. People have got a problem, they need to do some kind of requisition, they need to write a job description, then that goes through several loops, then the role is advertised. You know, I was doing some work last week in a firm, and they said, to be frank, honestly, by the time we advertised a role, just for belts and braces and diversity purposes, the reality is the hiring manager has already tapped somebody on the back for that role. And that's often a colleague, and they've said, look, who do we know? Who do we know? So they might get somebody in whose skill set actually isn't as perfect as an external candidate would be, but it's the devil they know. They know they're going to fit in, they know what they can do, and they kind of get on with it.
Interesting.
It's
That's very much what always happens.
Yeah.
Zena, just to go on to a slightly different tack then, if someone is looking to market themselves, what do you think is the optimum way about going about this, to market themselves into the jobs market?
Well, I think they need to have. Is this a time to talk about mind flip?
I think it is, yeah.
I think that in my experience, people hate selling themselves. I do. Most of us do. It's an uncomfortable situation to say, look, I'm brilliant. And, you know, CVs were full of all that guff about I work well in a team or individually, I'm a great person, you know, these are all my subjective character traits, particularly in the personal statement section. But if you think about it, if ever you've hired somebody in a civilian situation, you don't go to HR and say, let's get a successful, ambitious person who's got drive. You don't. You say, look, I need somebody who's great at Excel, really customer focused, understands this technology, worked in a strong governance area, understands our regulation. Let's get somebody who can hit the ground running. Very, very specific. So we have to move away from this idea of being a generalist. I can do anything that you need me to do. So what is it you need? I can do anything. To actually saying, look, this is my skill set. This is what I understand. I understand, it might be some specific technical thing. It might be I'm really good at training disenfranchised young people, turning them around and, making them into, great soldiers within 3 months. And, building some kind of picture about it. Very, very specific. The reason why my book is called Mind Flip is I just realised that if I can get people not thinking about themselves, thinking about what outcomes they've achieved, what they can do for other people and the contribution that they make, and talk about the end result. This is specifically what I've done. And I find with working with military officers, there's a certain amount of vulnerability, and people talk a lot about their character traits. Whereas actually, and almost try and, tell me what you think about this, Clive, because you might disagree, but almost kind of homogenize their experience, kind of make it into civilian speak. I was a middle tier, manager and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a great narrative to say, this is my rank, this is what I've done, these are the kind of things, but then try and link it to something in the job description very, very specifically.
I think I'd agree with you there, but I know quite a lot of the advice that is given out there is saying civilianize your appointments and make it match what the potential employer is looking at. I think we agree with you that you shouldn't really civilianize these. You may need to put a little explanation in your CV or application as to what that job was all about, so that the, if you like, non-military employer can understand what you're talking about, but not to civilianize it. We see a lot of people say that they work towards the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, but actually there aren't Chief Executive Officers in the military because people don't have profit and loss responsibility.
No, but isn't it much better to say, I reported to the whatever his 4-star general in charge of, 30,000, just put some numbers on it and metrics. I mean, one of your biggest selling points is that they're army officers, and I think there's so much great goodwill in principle towards helping people move into civilian life. Obviously, they're all the kind of people that we need in business. And if the recruiter is such a moron that they can't understand, and you've written it very clearly, exactly who you are and what you've done, and they can't extrapolate it, you really don't want to work for people like that anyway. I mean, I really feel quite strongly about this. I've seen those awfully dumbed down CVs, and they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Personally, I think all this stuff should be exaggerated. You know, I'm all for exaggerating. I mean bigging up what you're great at and not trying to pretend you haven't got it. I don't mean exaggerate. You know what I mean? I think that I find time and time again with clients that the people that get jobs are very clear on who they are and what they want and where they're going. And they've got a great sense of energy and verve that is quite infectious. Whereas people who are too grateful, I'll take anything, they kind of miss the mark a little bit and don't get those job offers. So I spent a lifetime working out the difference between people that get hired and people don't, and people that get on and people don't. And I think there's definitely something about somebody saying, this is what I've done, this is what I'm looking to do next, and this is the skills that bridge the two, and articulating it well. So the short answer is, do not try and dumb it down and pretend that you're not what you are.
Zena, I'm going to combine a couple of questions, if I may, one of which has just come in. The question is, how can I promote myself to a potential employer and demonstrate that I could solve his problems if I have no financial or commercial experience? And another question, in a sense, links to this. How can I prove transferable skills when the employer is demanding proven results?
Well, are you sure you don't have any commercial or financial experience? I find that quite hard to believe, actually. So it depends what your definition of commercial is. I mean, I think this is why you need to get in front of people to talk to them. Easier said than done. Like I say, I can't believe that somebody in an organisation won't have a cup of coffee with you, either internal recruitment, HR, or better still, somebody doing the job that you've contacted to say, I'm really interested, you know, could you spare me half an hour at lunchtime? This is what I'd like to talk to you about. And you've got a business head in. And I think that showing an understanding of their business problems, researching the organisation, what's going on with them, trying to read the lines, demonstrates commercial acumen to start with. Now, if you feel that you've got to manage a budget and you really feel, for example, that you're weak financially, it's not difficult to do a financial management for non-financial managers course, for example. I mean, those are, a 2-day course or a 1-day course at a good education provider will sort that out. But I think that you can, there are plenty of people working in industry who aren't commercial. I think we're talking to an audience of bright, sharp people here. And by demonstrating, asking the right questions, you demonstrate that you are commercial. And in terms of transferable skills, I don't like that sort of, I've done this, therefore I am this. I mean, I think you've got to say, this is why I'm interested in this is what I feel I can bring to it. And leave it to them in a way to think, okay, I'm going to give this person a go. But I would have thought if you drill down enough into what the problems are, you can somehow come up with examples of doing something very similar. And if quite clearly you just have never done the job before, then they're not going to hire you full stop, but try and find a way in. It's a kind of ambiguous answer. I'm sorry it's not more specific. Maybe people want to give us, if there's any specific examples people want to give, we'd love to hear them. Okay. Maybe job titles they're looking for example, would be helpful.
So do send that in if you have that. Let me move on to another one then, which is coming. I've been a full-time mum for 10 years, so I think there was work experience prior to that. How do I approach the market? How can I cover this gap in my working life?
Well, there are some really good women returner programs. I think, again, there's interest in organisations in principle for getting good calibre people back in the market. I know that you know, management consultancies are very involved in this. I'm doing some work with a women returners program in a bank, for example. They do want specific skills. The reality is that you've kind of got to go back into what you were doing in the past. I would try and get some work experience. Now, I hate grown-up interns. It makes me quite cross. Again, I'm so opinionated, aren't I? However, if you've got to do a bit of work for nothing just to get back into an office environment, you don't need to say you're not getting paid for anything. I would just try and beg, borrow, steal some work experience and get your skills up to date. And I think this is when it's really important to have a great LinkedIn profile, a really contemporary looking CV, so you don't look vulnerable and out of date. I've had anecdotal feedback from employers on those women returner programs that frankly, the people that they'd kind of hire anyway, whether they were on a women returners program or not. Of course, the reality is they wouldn't have seen them if they hadn't been on a program. But what I mean is, although these things are very endorsed by HR departments, the reality is of a hiring manager, again, they don't want vulnerable workers. They want people who are confident and can hit the ground running. So quite a bit of fake it to make it, and get as much experience doing anything back in the modern workplace to get your confidence up and have something to talk about that's recent.
How would you cover a gap in your employment in a CV or an application? Would you just refer, say, I've been off as a full-time mum, or I've taken a sabbatical, or some such thing like that?
Yeah, no, I think I think, remember, the client is thinking, the organisation is thinking, what can this person do for me? So a gap is fine. Just make it interesting. You know, I'm sure there could be a little bit of maybe relocating, something like that. If you've lived abroad, got any other experiences, you will have done things in that gap. So you might have managed a holiday home, run the PTA, done something. You know, you will have undoubtedly made some contribution or learnt something or did something in that time. So kind of make it interesting and fulfilling. Then slap in on the top of it, you know, what you're doing recently. And even voluntary experience, as I say, you know, maybe there's some volunteering or some charities you've been involved in that time. All that experience is helpful. And I've seen plenty of people go back after sabbaticals and gaps. It's not a problem. But this is when really, if people know you, it's enormously helpful. So people know that you've got some skills and you're taking some wobbly steps back in. So, you know, a few months here and a few weeks here is all helpful to get back into work.
So this again endorses networking and making contact with people.
Completely, absolutely, totally, yeah. And if we could just talk about network, I think people get twisted up about networking. It means going to some god awful, kind of slightly tragic, warm white wine or dreary breakfast event somewhere horrible, and you know, in one of those things where everybody's swapping business cards and people's looking at someone over your shoulder and not talking to you, and all the things that make us all cringe. And hide in the blue, frankly. I think that a network can be your friends, people that you know through, if you're a mum, all those people you know through school, anybody at work. And we say now about networking, and this is all about the power of trusted connections, people that trust you and know you. And you only need a few of these. It's not about quantity at all. It's better to go to one event in your industry, you meet one nice person that you stay in touch with and actually want to look after them. It's, you know, it's about doing favours forwards, not just waiting for people to help you. Those things are really powerful. I've had people get jobs through the gym, through all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be something, you know, it's anybody who's got anything to do with the workplace and actually, because all the networking theory, isn't it? It's the whole connector thing, it's people who know people. And everybody knows people who know people. It's not your immediate connections, it's one removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple of questions, Zena, sorry to move on, but thank you for that one. I'm a generalist, but most organizations seem to be looking for specialists. So how do I break in under those circumstances?
I'm not sure you are a generalist, actually. I think you're an ex-army officer, so that puts you you know, already you know about the defence industry, you know about particular reporting chains, you know about managing certain types of individuals. There might be particular technology, systems, processes, regulations you've used. I mean, I think you've got to really look under the bonnet here, because, you know, already you're not a generalist at all. I don't know who is a generalist. Nobody is. You talk about, you know, people's skills go, or careers go into kind of a T shape at the beginning, sorry, at the top. So you're a CEO. You're still a CEO who knows about something. You know about yield. You know about turning organisations around in particular context, for example. So, so no. I think I would sit down with a nice Sharpie and a load of paper and do a bit of a mind map and think, okay, what do I really know about? What are my functional skills? What are my industry skills or my sector skills? And write down. That could be languages. It could be, as I say, the particular type of people you've reported to, something in your degree. I mean, you just need to do lists of stuff that you know.
Mm-hmm. To make yourself more specialised for the recruiter or the employer.
Yeah.
Sorry,
people ignore their languages, their native languages, languages that they know, their demographic. You know, there's a lot right under your nose, and sometimes you need help with it. But again, I think it's I think most of us are much more specialists than we realise, have more expertise.
Okay, thanks, Zena. So if you've got any more questions, anybody, can you pop them through now? But one new question, Zena, quite specific. This gentleman says, I'm still serving at the moment, but quite worried about my 4-month notice period. Commercially, is that considered a long notice period?
No. Next question. No, not at all.
Next question, please.
I feel at your level, if you were employed in an organisation, your notice would be between 6 months and 3 months. So no, it isn't. And actually, you know, don't be interested to know more about you actually if you found a job or not. But you have to make people. If people will wait for somebody good to start. Most people, as I say, most headhunters will tell you that they don't want active candidates. They want, what we all want is that passive candidate. So, and a passive candidate is somebody who's in a role at the moment, is happy, is successful, and is doing well. That's what the recruiters are being paid for, to find those kinds of people. And they nurture their talent pools by saying, okay, look, we know you're really good, but tell us, what is it that will take to make you move? And if we find that one thing that's better where you are, can we talk to you about it? That's how they earn their living, by finding passive candidates. The brutal reality is that, generally speaking, and most people listening to this will be in that slightly different set of circumstances, but mainstream people in organisational life, the recruiters and headhunters are paid to find passive candidates. They don't want job seekers that everybody else has got. So, you know, they don't want people who are actively on the market or unemployed. They want people who are successful, and therefore they have to wait for them because they expect them to be on a notice period. So the notice period is not a problem.
Okay. Zena, this has been fantastic. I don't know if you realise you've been talking for nearly 40 minutes, which is amazing. Probably to spare this, I think I'll begin to call this to a close. There are a couple of other questions we've received, which for those who sent them in, what we'll try and do is respond to those by email if we've got your details. And I'll try and answer
them really quickly. To waffle, would that help?
Yes, try this one. Going back to 75% under the counter positions. The underground recruitment market. What are you using a paid recruiter?
You mean you paying a recruiter? Oh no, 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 no. That is the worst kind of helicopter parenting. I mean, I'm sure there's some notable exceptions to this, but as a general rule, no, you don't need to. And it looks like it's like helicopter parenting, where you are doing everything for your kids, and they think actually no, you know, they need to do it themselves. So I don't like it, actually. I think people are, I don't want to get myself in legal hot water here, but I've seen some casualties who have promised, you know, that this thing about the hidden job market. The hidden job market is you working out what your transferable skills are and unlocking the market that way yourself. There aren't. I know people say we'll we'll tap into the hidden job market for you, but I would be very, very wary before you fork out thousands of pounds to make sure that you've got proof that they genuinely have vacancies that nobody else has for somebody like you. Because I think generally what it means is that they just, you know, where is your CV going, and is it being kind of, you know, snowballed or out all over the market? So I would be quite cautious about this. I really would. I'd try and, before you write a big check, I really would speak to people who've got a similar skill set to you, who they've placed successfully. I'm so glad that question came up, actually.
Okay. Well, I'll give you one more before we close then. Having been made redundant after 5 years in his first job after the services, what's your advice on how this particular question should market himself for sectors not related to his specific experience? He's in the commercial maritime sector. How should he market himself for sectors not related to his experience?
I think you've got to find some hooks. So in my experience, people change function or sector. They don't change both. So you have to work out what it is that's the bridge between the sectors that you're interested in. It's definitely doable, but there'll be something about, we called it the poacher come gamekeeper move on our first webinar. There'll be something about what you know about that's useful, what your previous maritime experience can give to this other sector. So is it a supplier? Is it a sector that wants the lessons learned from your previous sector? Is it a sector that's got some sort of similar customer base or employer base or something? So you've got to find the similarities of what you can bring to them and make it quite explicit. Otherwise it's difficult to do. But they'll be there. You just have to figure it out. You know, it's got to be a sector that wants you specifically because of that experience, even if it's different, and you've got to tell them why it's different. So I talk in my book about somebody who went from the music industry into, I think he went into gaming. I can't remember, my mind's gone blank because of time pressure, but I think he went into gaming because they wanted the lessons learned. No, he went into music because they wanted the they wanted the lessons learned from his original sector. So there'll be some links. I'm waffling now, but you know, drill down, look under the bonnet.
An excellent waffle, I must say. Zena, look, thank you very much indeed. That really is great. If we get any more questions, because I think we've cleared them all now, for those of you who are sending them in, we will look at addressing them and trying to get back to you through a different means. But Zena, thank you very much indeed. That was a really excellent webinar and presentation. Thank you. So, if you want to keep in touch with Zena, her contact details are there on the screen. And
can I add to that? Do please link in with me and sign up to my mailing list, because I put this kind of stuff out, and I've also got a great network on LinkedIn. So link in and let's keep in contact.
And we got some more information about you there. There's your email and website. Great. So Zena, thank you very much indeed. That's terrific.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
And to close the webinar, could I ask all of those who've logged in, just to complete this poll on your screens, has tonight's webinar helped you? And A, a lot, B, some, C, a little, D, not at all. And this is useful feedback for us to be able to steer future webinars in the right direction. If you'd care to poll now, I'd be grateful. Okay. So if it's all right, I'll close the poll now. And thank you all very much. And I hope tonight has been an interesting evening for you all. And my thanks, of course, to our guest speaker, Zena Everett, for talking to us tonight. So good night and thank you all very much.